listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Welcome to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross alongside our GM here at VSiN, Mark Dominik, former GM of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Mark, great to have you on the program today of all days. The Monday after the regular season concludes each and every year is never an easy day for executives, for head coaches, because we know it's just the nature of the beast that people are going to lose their jobs. And normally this is people and execs and coaches from teams that are not in the postseason. So we'll get to the wild card weekend, super wild card weekend here later on in the program. But let's begin there, because we do know as of right now, as of you and I having this conversation, there are currently 5 head coaching openings in the NFL, the 3 interim jobs that we had all throughout the regular season here, and then the 2 added, right? MAYO being relieved of his duties as a head coach of the New England Patriots. And then on Monday, Doug Peterson being told that he would be let go from the Jacksonville Jaguars. Do you think we get any more? Is this a little bit low from normally what we've seen on a given Monday after the regular season?
Yeah, maybe we got a little more patience from owners. Maybe the grass is always greener. Maybe it's the candidates aren't as strong. Maybe they're a little bit more looking at the overall big picture. And we saw a bunch of teams that had switches last year. You think about Dave Canales in Carolina. You think about Callahan in Nashville with the Titans, and they're on their first year. And usually you don't see a lot of one and dones. We certainly have seen one so far with MAYO. I think all eyes are still on the Las Vegas Raiders and what will happen with Antonio Pierce. That I think is still up for debate. Other than that, unless there's a wild card, Dave, I don't think I see another firing coming from the head coach. I think there's a little bit of GM watch going on around the National Football League still. So far, I think we only have just really the opening at the Jets. Seems to be the only real GM job that's open as we speak. There are debates. It looks like Balky's going to stay back in Jacksonville. We can get into that. No real word coming out of Nashville with Rand Carthon. And if Antonio Pierce is gone, does that mean Tom Telesco leaves as well, based off that they were just both hired last year? I don't know if Mark Davis is looking to do that, considering at least they got Brock Bowers right. Which was a nice pick. But I think what we're still seeing, Dave, is not just the head coaches, but the coordinators. And I think that's what we're going to see a little bit more of now. And we're going to see head coaches get fired. Sure, could Antonio Pierce be the last name? Yes. But do I think that that's the end of coordinators? No. I think today and tomorrow, Monday, Tuesday, even up to Wednesday, could still be time for coordinators and position coaches that will get let go. It's just the typical thing you start to do this time of year, sadly. And you're already trying to figure out who that replacement is. Some of those coaches are already in mind. But yeah, we've got 5 head coaching openings. Kind of in a weird way, it's kind of nice not to have too many. But I think that might not bode well for 2026 at this time, and 1 year from now when we might have a lot more. But, 5, no real surprise who didn't get fired. I think MAYO was the only one I wasn't really sure was going to happen based off him being handpicked by Robert Kraft to be the guy. But obviously that tells you there was things going on in that building that weren't going the way that I think anybody at the Patriots expected.
And that's the interesting part. By the way, you mentioned the coordinators. Lou Anarumo has been relieved of his duties as the defensive coordinator of the Bengals. So there's one of those coordinator dominoes, as you're alluding to, Mark, to already fall there in Cincinnati. Let's get back to MAYO, because I felt like when this happened, and I was doing a show on VSiN with Jonathan Von Tobel live that Sunday, when that news came down, after they won that final game, which, by the way, moved them from being the number 1 pick in the draft down to 4 in the draft. I thought it symbolized, they must have a deal worked out with Mike Vrabel. Robert Kraft's already got this figured out. But you don't think that's necessarily the case, that it was more of a disconnect, as you mentioned, as the year went on. And no matter who is the replacement, they just weren't going to go forward with MAYO. Is that kind of the rationale here?
That's kind of my thinking, is I think that they were going to make the change regardless. Vrabel, allegedly interviewed with the Jets, and yet you got to remind yourself that every team needs to comply with the Rooney Rule. So even if you have a coach that is a minority candidate, that doesn't mean you automatically just go hire somebody. You've got to bring through the Rooney Rule. So you're going to see that, I think, with all these clubs bringing in candidates they feel could be the head coach. Aaron Glenn's certainly drawn a lot of interest based off of what he's done as a season, but really, certainly last night was a nice performance for the Detroit Lions and their defense against the Vikings again. He's a name. You're seeing Vance Joseph kick around a little bit now again, that Vance has had an opportunity to play, get the defenses back in pack. And does he deserve another opportunity? So we're going to see some of those names, as long as, the hot name is obviously Ben Johnson, and what, where does he want to land on this carousel of 5 openings? And I think he's got to really look at the quarterbacks and kind of really get a sense of what's the best situation from a quarterback perspective, or what's the best situation from maybe it's drafting a guy, but it needs to be around the quarterback. I think Ben can be selective if he decides not to take a job this year. I don't see Detroit's offense falling off the cliff at all in 2025, 2026. And so I think he could have another choice there. But I think you're really trying to look at that from the different lenses of the different teams. So I think the Patriots, no matter what, we're going to make this move, and now the search begins.
So in Jacksonville, with Doug Pearson being shown the door there, but Trent Baalke is going to stay on, as you alluded to here, as the GM. Does that make a Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn? Does it make that interview process a little bit more difficult, because you don't know how long Trent Baalke is going to be there, if this is in fact possibly the last year that he has to prove as a GM, maybe the last coach that he gets to hire? How does that conversation start with Peterson out, but Baalke staying in?
Well, I think for Shad Khan and family, they've got to decide who they're really targeting. And quite frankly, if that head coach just says, look, I'll come, but I want a different personnel person, you've got to be ready to make that move. And that's happened in the National Football League before, where it's like, I need this personnel person with me, and therefore that's how I'm going to take this job, or I'm not going to take it. And so I think that's the leverage that some of these coaches have. Trent Baalke has been around a lot of head coaches now, or quite a few, I should say. And it maybe hasn't gone as well as you'd like sometimes. I think that could make that decision, that pick in terms of going to Jacksonville, a little more difficult for head coaches to want to take.
Yep, it seems like it. His history in San Francisco, the way things ended there, the way they've gone so far in Jacksonville, very interesting. But it looks like Baalke's going to get one more decision-making process here for a head coach in 2025 in Jacksonville. Some teams that didn't decide to make moves, and maybe the surprising one was Joe Schoen in New York, because you alluded to it last week on GM Shuffle, that we'd heard those reports, right, that maybe Brian Daboll and Schoen were not necessarily tied at the hip and joined at the hip, that if one could go and one could stay. Looks like they're both going to stay in New York. Did that surprise you at all?
A little bit. I mean, I think that they were looking at their organization, trying to decide, what are they going to do at quarterback? Again, the Giants' ownership has been traditionally a lot more conservative, a little less aggressive. I think that's what they wanted to do again here. I think they like Joe Schoen. I think they like Brian Daboll. I think they looked at the glass half full and said, hey, look, let's give these guys a new quarterback. Let's make sure we make the right decisions here. And I'm sure that they talked to those two guys about whose is that quarterback, based off of where they're selecting and what can they do in terms of getting in position. I think they hold the number 3 pick in the draft. So, they don't get the overall choice. The Titans have the number 1 pick. So if there's a quarterback they love, they get to take him. But I think that the Giants decided to say, hey, let's just hold tight. Let's see what Brian Daboll can be with a quarterback that he drafts or he selects or chooses in free agency, instead of one that was already there before he got there. And so I think that's the most important thing, is they want to give these guys a chance to pick their own quarterback now and see what that person can do.
Your relationship with Brian Daboll goes way back when you were even in Tampa, right? Like you've seen what Brian Daboll is all about way before I think a lot of the rest of the league did, right? Is this another reason why you think, yeah, he's had to inherit guys now? Let him pick his guy, and it might look different next year for New York.
Yeah, I tried to hire Brian a few years back as a coordinator for us in Tampa Bay when I was GM. I mean, I like the guy a lot. He's good to work with, a good personnel guy. Ego isn't too big. Certainly can, see the big picture, but also is willing to kind of look at the overall picture and say, maybe a defensive player is a better pick in this spot. I think he's kind of shown that he's being willing to do that. I think it's more the biggest part of Brian is letting him be part of the selection of the quarterback. And I think he's going to clearly be a big piece of that as they go forward, along with Joe Schoen. And that I think that they get to come together and decide, what are they going to do? Because the draft isn't the 2024 draft. This is the 2025 draft. And there aren't going to be 6 quarterbacks going in round 1. And I think everybody kind of gets that sense. And when you realize the first 2 teams in front of you both would take a quarterback, if there's one on the board, I think that's the Cleveland Browns, but certainly the Tennessee Titans. that how do you realize that you might not get one in the draft. So what are you going to do for agency? So a lot of these clubs are going to get to watch different moves. And, could Kirk Cousins end up a New York Giant? I think so. I think that's a possibility. I know that Giants fans are like, what? But you've got to decide of the veterans that are available, does Aaron Rodgers, want to play football? And does the new Jets organization, head coach, GM, want to keep Aaron Rodgers? If they say bid fair due and farewell, and who's next? There's not a ton of veterans, but there are some. Sam Darnold comes to mind, right? He's the guy that everybody's got to think through. Sam Darnold's not going to be a Jet. Like, you can put that in the book in the bank and take it. There's just no way that they're going to sign Sam.
Every user, of course, that happened.
Not a chance. But, when you think about the real overall group of, quarterbacks that, you could say, can I get this guy? Can he help me in 2025? I think you're looking at only 3 or 4 names max. And I think that's a tough spot to be in when you realize there's about 7 or 8, 9 clubs that could all take a quarterback.
Very quickly, got about 90 seconds before I take a quick break. In Indianapolis, Chris Ballard's coming back, Shane Steichen's coming back, which I assume means Anthony Richardson's coming back. Are those 3? Because normally it's 2, the head coach of the GM joined at the hip. Do you include Anthony Richardson in that? And that you guys got to all show something here in year number 3, much longer for Ballard, but year 3 for Steichen and for Richardson.
Well, I think they all 3 do. I think they all have to perform next year, because I think if they don't, if this Colts team ends up 5-12, 6-11, some 7, even 7-10, and Richardson has some injuries or doesn't look like he's much better or kind of stays status quo, I think the next GM comes in and says, it wasn't my pick, and they move on, right? It's kind of in that kind of scenario where I think what we're seeing in Indy. So I think all 3 of them are really joined at the hip saying, let's go. We got to have a great offseason. We got to get the right guys. Got to stay healthy. Got to get the right guys on defense. Try to build this team to be as good as they can in an AFC South that is still very wide open. As good as the Texans are, they didn't run away with it this year. So I think you got to feel comfortable that you could find a way to put a team together pretty quick when you got Jonathan Taylor.
When we come back, we're going to get into Super Wildcard Weekend here, Mark. But also, I want to continue on this front with teams that are not making the postseason, maybe didn't make changes, or more changes to come. That's next when you come back with us right here on the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We are back on the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross alongside our GM, Mark Dominik. Mark, I want to look ahead, obviously, to what we're going to see in Super Wildcard Weekend, but some tentacles left over from the regular season now. It's come and gone here in the 2004 into 2005 regular season. And one of those was in Green Bay. And we saw the Bears get a win against the Packers. Caleb Williams was all jacked up. Maybe, the curse is over. They finally beat the Packers. I don't know that Thomas Brown's going to be there. They've already wiped out Shane Waldron. He's long gone. And certainly Matt Eberflus, right? Those are all distant in the rearview mirror. Ryan Poles, are they going to allow Ryan Poles to make these decisions here? Or if you're in the front office, if you're Kevin Warren, and certainly the ownership group here, McCaskey's and the like, are they going to look at this and say, I don't know that I want Ryan Poles to make this decision if the last one we made just flamed out?
Yeah, Ryan Poles looks like he's holding on to his job. Kevin Warren kind of gave him a very good recommendation of at least the opportunity to say, hey, look, he's going to help us with the search and find the next head coach for the Chicago Bears. I think this is another GM that's barely holding on to their position based off of performance, based off of draft selections, based off of the overall, direction of the football team. And so, but Ryan Poles, I think, is going to be part of the process in hiring the next head coach of the Chicago Bears. And I think they're hiring a different head coach. I don't think that they're going to stay status quo. I think we'll start to see more and more names float through the Bears, and we'll start to see people come through. It's been a hard season. Look, the Bears won. They beat the Packers. A lot of special teams help in that game. Packers starting to bench people. Malik Willis got hurt in the game, so they're kind of banged up at quarterback across the board a little bit walking into the postseason. But sure, the Bears can feel good about it, but it doesn't change where I think the Bears are in that division, sadly. They've got a lot of work to do, and I don't know if it's all going to come together. We'll get to see it over the offseason. The biggest hire you're going to make now is what are you going to do for Caleb Williams to make him hopefully the player you pick number 1 overall. And, anytime Jaden Daniels goes out there as the number 2 pick, And, it was a slam dunk allegedly for Caleb Williams. I think you got to look at the GM and say, why was that? Did you get caught up in the hype, or what have we done here? So it's an important hire. I think it's an offensive hire, that they've got to do, or something that a system that maybe Caleb's been around or been in to be successful. But Ryan Poles will be part of the decision making, and that's the way it looks from Kevin Moore's mouth.
It's fascinating looking back, right? So before the draft last year, and I remember Cliff Kingsbury was at Hallis Hall, or maybe, I don't know if he actually got to Hallis Hall, but looks like he was interviewing for that job when everybody assumed it was going to be Caleb Williams, and he didn't take that job. He goes to D.C., they draft Jaden Daniels. Maybe they knew exactly which quarterback they actually wanted, and they got the right one in D.C. When maybe hopefully it works out in Chicago too for Caleb long term. But certainly Jaden Daniels is going to be the presumptive Rookie of the Year. Speaking of the Bears, looking up in the division, they just watched Minnesota and Detroit battle it out for the top spot, not only in the NFC North, but in the overall conference. So that's how far down the Bears are in that pecking order. And didn't look good for Sam Darnold and even Kevin O'Connell in that matchup, 31-9. The Lions get the win. What's the takeaway for you, Mark? And obviously, kudos to Detroit, 15-win team, and Minnesota still went 14-3 in the regular season. They'll be the highest seeded, if you will, wildcard team ever with 14 wins. We've never seen that before. But what is the takeaway? That Sam Darnold had a regression game? Maybe Kevin O'Connell didn't have his best coaching game? Or more about the Lions and what they were able to do with a patched-up defense?
Yeah, I feel it was more of the Lions, the patched-up defense. They have not played that well defensively all season, it felt like, right? I mean, the last time they played the Vikings scored 29 on them. This time they scored 9. I think it was a huge boost in the cap and really for the entire team for Detroit to get this win the way they did. And they ran the ball. They controlled the clock. They dominated third down. The time of possession wasn't even close. And that's with Jared Goff throwing 2 picks. And it still felt not close. I mean, Jared Goff has a normal game, and this is a blowout, right? And this is like not even close. And so I think it's a huge momentum swing as if it's slowed down, but a momentum swing for the Detroit Lions to be the number 1 seed, to now, have an extra week to lick your wounds, to kind of really look at your football team, pick up any slack, maybe, get something back, hopefully in the postseason where you get a little healthier just across the board on your football team. Yeah. I think for the Vikings, this was a real awakening. We've joked about it before. Kevin O'Connell says sometimes you get punched in the mouth, but you don't need a Mike Tyson knockout. That's what it felt like. That felt like a Mike Tyson knockout. Like, wow, that team did not look like the 14-win team. That team looked like more of a 7 seed, or maybe somebody doesn't even make the postseason. Now they're, the 5 seed, and they've got to go to L.A. to play the Rams, that a team that I think is dangerously hot right now. So it's a unique combination here. When we're talking about coaches and hiring, I get the sense when we've got the 5 spots so far, and whether it's 6 or 7, we'll see in the next 24 to 48 hours. I think we're going to see an offensive run. I think we're going to see only offensive coaches get hired. Could Cliff Kingsbury be back in the hunt? You think about his success, and why wouldn't that name, now that he doesn't have Kyler Murray, he's got a real quarterback that he likes working with. Maybe we were too quick to, Matt Nagy's name's showing up on a lot of lists now, from Kansas City, in terms of his name coming back around and being able to interview for spots. We also know that obviously Ben Johnson is a guy that people like and that is going to get a job that he wants. So I really think you're going to see these spots get held. But think about it, right? It's Jacksonville. We've got to get Trevor Lawrence right. We're paying him $55 million a year to be average. Like, why would we do that? You think about the Jets, and they've got to fix the quarterback situation or the offensive room. The problem that they've been on the defensive coaches for a little bit here. They need to fix, to me, an offensive coordinator to make sure. When you think about the Patriots and the quarterbacks they have with Drake May and Joe Milton played well, obviously I want to make sure that's going well. So you think about the Bears and Caleb Williams. That's why I feel like it's almost going to be a clean sweep. Offensive coordinators are going to get the jobs this year. I don't think defensive coordinators are going to have much shot.
That's fascinating because I think people are going to go, oh my goodness, we're going to bring back those retreads. Well, Raheem Morris was a retread. Mike McCarthy was a retread. You do this, right? And you hope that people, when they give a second shot at these, Todd Bowles was a Jets head coach.
Was a retread. John Gruden was a retread.
They're up and down, right? That's
sometimes they learn, right? Sometimes head coaches get a job and they learn a lot and they come back and do things a little differently and they can have great success. I mean, that's the one thing that's always interesting to me, is it's like you learn a lot when whether you're GM or your head coach. while you're in the fire, you're learning a ton. And then when you step away from it, you can even see more ways of different ways that clubs are doing it, maybe different ways that coaches are doing it. And it gives you some good perspective. And so I'm not surprised you see names like, a Nagy who, people really liked. And he's watching Kansas City and he's on a staff that's consistently performing. And boom, why wouldn't you think about him as another opportunity? So it's not a big surprise to me. I think that these clubs are looking at their quarterback going, we've got to get that person right. And therefore, It's hard for me to imagine specifically New England, Chicago, and Jacksonville going a defensive coordinator. Maybe the Saints do, maybe the Jets do, but the only team right now I think could be a defensive or maybe it's a special teams coach is New Orleans is probably the only one I think it's wide open where I think it could be anybody.
Because if we're going to talk about retreads, Bill Belichick is arguably the greatest head coach of all time. Retread. It didn't work out in Cleveland so well. Worked out pretty darn well in New England. So that's a stigma of these retreads. I think, Mark, you're spot on. Sometimes you learn from your mistakes in the first stop and you're better off sometimes in that second spot. We mentioned the Rams, and we mentioned it, and we talked about it, you and I, and VSiN by the book, shameless plug. And we talked about how these coaches and organizations approached Week 18 differently for teams that were going to the postseason. We saw Andy Reid say, I'm not playing anybody, right? That game meant nothing to us. They get shut out by the Broncos. Broncos get in with that 7th seed in the AFC. We saw the Packers try to play their guys. They did play their guys, and a couple of them got dinged up, like Christian Watson, Jordan Love, and even Malik Willis coming in relief of Jordan Love. And yet they lost the game and slipped to the 7. And then the Rams, who sat all their guys, fought hard for that 3 spot, ultimately lost to Seattle. They slipped to the 4. What do you make of the Rams in that decision? Yeah, we're not going to play Puka. We're not going to play Cooper. We're not going to play Stafford. Sean McVay, Andy Reid, I know that they're comfortable in their own skin making those decisions, and they still tried to get those wins. They didn't happen that way. But there are many different ways to approach Week 18 for those playoff teams, right?
Yeah, and if you look at the Rams, they shut down their quarterback, their 2 receivers, and basically their offensive line, right? They took because they have a lot of young defensive players. So Jared Verse is out there, he's playing. Even though he's had a great rookie year, you sit there and say, well, he shouldn't play. He still played like 15 to 20 snaps as well. I look at it from Sean McVay's perspective is this team has gone through the gamut a little bit. Early in the regular season, the Rams were struggling a little bit, but they were banged up at injuries, just nonstop, and it was just so, especially at the wide receiver room. But now, towards the end of the season, when they got healthier, like, ooh, this Rams team's good. I think Sean McVay goes, hey, look, if we're going to win the NFC, it's going to be a battle no matter what. We've got a guaranteed home game, which is what we really fought for, so that's huge. I think if that was on the line, that would certainly be a different story for the Rams. So we got a guaranteed home game. Let's not have any more injuries. We've seen this team when they're banged up, especially how I would say whether it's – I don't know what the right word is, but certainly Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are both more fragile as of late, right? They haven't been able to stay healthy for a while over the last couple of years, and so – or certainly for Puka for this year. And so I think that when you see that your team could be that fragile, it's like, what's the point of 3 or 4? We get a home game. Yes, we're going to have to play. Now it's the Vikings. That doesn't look as ominous as it did maybe, 48 hours ago. Now it looks like it's a team like, good, we're playing the right team at the right time possibly. Who knows? The Vikings can come back. But I think that I like what Sean McVay did. I think you want to win a championship. And I don't fight Dan Campbell and sit there and say, hey, look, you did it the wrong way. You went out to San Francisco in a meaningless game, and you beat the 49ers, and you came back and walloped the Vikings. It doesn't mean he's wrong, right? It's just a difference of opinion. I lean more towards the McVay, Andy Reid. We're here to win a championship. And even more with McVay, losing the 3 seed, yes. Does that hurt? Sure. Does that mean you're probably going to have to go to Detroit? Possibly, right? But if you're going to go to the NFC Championship game and go to try to play for the Super Bowl, you're going to take the hard road at some point. Somewhere you're going to be on the road. And so at the 4th seed, I think that that's a good decision because I think they want to be 100% healthy for the postseason. And I think the Rams are a very, very tough out Week 1 and not the team the Minnesota Vikings would rather play.
Yep. I concur 100%. Again, the matchups here in the NFC, you got the 7 seed Packers going to the 2 seed Eagles. You've got the 6-seeded Commanders with that late victory over the Cowboys. They will be taking on the 3 seed in Tampa Bay. That's a rematch from Week 1 in the regular season. As you mentioned, Mark, that will be another rematch. The Vikings lost out there on a Thursday night in the middle of the year here against the Rams. So we got rematches in a lot of these spots, and certainly the Packers and Eagles have been familiar with each other in the years previous too. So a lot of familiarity here in Super Wildcard Weekend on the NFC side. When we come back, let's break down the AFC side in Super Wildcard Weekend. Tell you who's in, who's out, and what to look forward to. That's next here on the GM Show.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
We continue the GM Shuffle presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Dave Ross alongside our GM, Mark Dominik. And Mark, let's get to the AFC side of the equation here in the postseason Super Wildcard Weekend. A super rookie, certainly in Denver, and Bo Nix. And I'm sure Sean Payton shutout win over Andy Reid. That had to feel good. But also, it's got to feel good for all the critics that were out there saying, what are you doing? You're drafting Bo Nix, 12th overall in the first round. He's the 6th quarterback off the board. So you got presumably the 6th best quarterback in the 12th spot. You think Sean's like, hey, guys, I know what I'm doing, and I know what I'm doing when it comes to quarterback. Does that validate everything that Sean Payton, as if he needed the validation from people like me?
Oh, I think it validates a lot. I think this was very important for him, especially what happened with Russell Wilson. And then start to see Russell Wilson play pretty good in Pittsburgh. You're like, ooh, Sean. But then he goes and takes Bo Nix and has all the experience. But they showed you early in the preseason how comfortable they were with Bo Nix in terms of being able to handle the verbiage of that offense and then be able to spit it out and make good decisions with the football. And that's all Bo Nix has done all year. He may not have been as flashy as Jaden Daniels by any stretch. He's not. He may not have the touchdown passes that some of the other guys have. He's not. But he does make great decisions. He puts them in position, and he's got leadership intangibles, and that all shows up on tape every week. Yeah, they beat the Chiefs, and it's a feel-good story. And anytime me starting my career with the Chiefs, when you lose to Denver, even if your backups are all out, it still doesn't feel good. It's Denver week. It's same with the Raider week. Like, it's the same thing in Kansas City. So they don't love it. But, it's look, I think for what this says about the 2024 draft class is enormous, right? You think about, Caleb Williams, who we still have yet to see, but Jaden Daniels – taking his team to the postseason. We don't know about McCarthy and what he's going to look like, but he certainly flashed a little bit in Minnesota. He felt pretty good about it. You've got Bo Nix leading his team to the postseason. Drake May looked pretty good, for the most, with the team that's got a lot of talent issues across the board that are lacking. And then Michael Penix throws for 300 last night in his last regular season game, which is, it's hard to do in this National Football League, especially as a rookie. So, it's a really exciting draft class, but it's even more rewarding, I think, for Sean Payton to be able to take a quarterback that a lot of people are like, well, he's old, he's got so much experience, how good is he going to be? And to prove everybody that, look, the Denver Broncos made the postseason. I don't think a lot of people had that on their scorecard starting the regular season. And, now they got to go to Buffalo. It's a tall order. I don't think I like their chances, but you know what? I'd rather tell me you got a chance than not to be there at all.
10 wins, rookie year, Bo Nix. Check. If you're Sean Payton, he checked all the boxes. Everything he could ask for and more. Very quickly, because, you saw talking heads out there saying, oh, what Andy Reid did in benching all of his guys, it's disrespectful to the sport. The commissioner's got to look into it. I'm like, what am I missing, Mark? Does Andy Reid competitive balance for the Bengals to get in the postseason? He's got to put an effort. Like, what is that? Andy Reid and the Chiefs wrapped up the number 1 seed with a week to go. None of that falls on the Chiefs and a responsibility to the league, does it?
None whatsoever. I think it's silly talk. It doesn't even make sense, the people that say that. It's really surprising to me because, look, Kansas City earned what they got to do. They earned it all the way through the regular season. They earned the right to decide if they want to play the last game. They're earning the right to try to go win another Super Bowl. Like, beat them. Like, don't complain about it. Have the team that you must like, beat them. But they earned the right to do what they want to do. And, every team, so were everybody just mad about the Rams and what they decided to do? Like, it's their choice. Like, you're trying to win a championship. So, yeah, okay, I've got to put Patrick Mahomes out there or Kelsey or Isaiah Pacheco or whoever it is on offense. Maybe it's Joe Thuney or it's Creed Humphreys or any of the players. And 2 guys go down and you're like, well, at least we played the game. Yay. We're not living. No, I'm not losing Patrick Mahomes on a game week 18. That doesn't mean anything. I've got to have him on my football field. I want to win as many games as I can. And if I'm lucky enough to be able to have a 2-game gap over the Buffalo Bills, which is hard enough to do, and then sit them, I think that's what you've earned. You've earned that opportunity. And I think that's the way you got to look at it. Not, oh, you owe the league something, and how can you sit players? That's not baloney. Every one of those people in that Chiefs locker room want another ring or want their first ring. Don't think that Hopkins isn't thinking about a ring, like everything in his brain and everything. He's there to have a chance to win hardware. And, as you get older in your years in the league, you realize how harder that is to get. You can secure the bag, but to secure a ring is a really tough proposition. And especially when you look at Kansas City stealing rings, right? It's been Brady, and now it's Kansas City. NFC's been pretty dry over the last couple decades of getting rings, except for Tampa. But other than that, it's been a spot where I don't fault them at all. I think it's the right decisions, and they earned that opportunity to decide how they want to manage their football club, and they don't owe it to anybody.
I concur 1,000%. 38-0 loss, but still 15-2 in the year. Nothing to play for. That's not on them, Cincinnati. You got to beat Gerard Mayo and the Patriots in week 1 at home before you start, bitching and moaning about what happened in week 18 in Denver. Has no bearing on why the Bengals are not in the postseason. To that end, the Steelers really come in limping. They lose their 4th in a row to end the season's 10-3 with, a spot potentially for the number 1 seed. Had they won out, that was in the cards for them, to 10-7, and now massive underdogs Saturday against Baltimore. Is there any way Mike Tomlin and company can pick up the pieces before they go to Charm City and take on Lamar for a 3rd time?
It's almost, I'm not a big believer in it. It is Mike Tomlin, who I am a big believer in. But the players need to get their act together. And George Pickens, I think it's a big piece. Pickens being banged up, Pickens being what feels like might be a maturity problem, having to hold him back. Like this, to me, it's an internal problem. And I don't think it's the players only meeting to some extent, because I don't think it's just more of like people need to pick up their slack and be a man about it. It's postseason time. Like forget everything else that's happened. It's postseason, one and done. Stop whining, stop complaining, stop anything. Let's focus on how do we get this thing going. The problem is I've got this machine about to come downhill on me, which is called Lamar Jackson and Derrick Henry, and the wide receivers and the offensive line, and what they've been able to do. And then obviously defensively they're playing a little bit better too. And so that's a scary thing when you think about the Ravens as a total package. Big problem. I think it's again, you got the ticket, you got a chance. It's hard to beat a team 3 times in the regular season and postseason. They know each other very well. Those 2 coaches have coached against each other, ginormous amount of times. And so it's not like there's any tendencies or tricks. It's just about how are people going to handle their business. And to me, the Pittsburgh Steelers have not handled business very well over the last 4 weeks. And it's some of it's injury related, some of it's personnel related, but it looks like it's overflowing a little bit all at the wrong time. And so it looks like they're running into a juggernaut in Baltimore, and I'm sure Baltimore's very happy to see it.
Yeah, rubber match here for the 3rd time, but it does feel like they are light years apart from the first time they faced each other to the last time they faced each other. 2 teams going in complete opposite directions, as you laid out there, Mark. When you look at Lamar, and we don't know if he's going to win his 3rd MVP. I don't know how he doesn't win the MVP, but look, you want to give it to Josh Allen, you want to make a case for Saquon, I'll listen to it. But watching that guy and the numbers that he has, what do you do as a head coach or a GM, and you guys are scheming to try to beat him, and you draft to try to beat a Lamar Jackson now if you're Pittsburgh, Cincinnati, or Cleveland? What do you think should be the pseudo game plan? If you could take anything away, what do you take away?
Well, you try to keep him in the pocket. I think you do everything you can to keep him in the pocket. Don't let him use his legs because he can beat you downfield. Obviously, with his legs is one thing, right? Almost another 1,000-yard season. We all know that. Everybody knows that. But the more you can keep Lamar Jackson in the pocket, the more chances you get a chance at a sack fumble. He's got 5 fumbles on the season. He's got more fumbles than he has interceptions. That's the secret. You've got to get him in the pocket. You got to sack fumble him. You got to strip him. And I think that's what you've got to look into. And I think, obviously they can come downhill on you. So you load up the box more. You're going to have to try to stop Derrick Henry, and you're going to have to try to contain the edges to make sure you're not over-rushing the quarterback and letting him outside. That takes a lot more discipline, but I'm going to lose the game if I have to, personally, if I'm the Pittsburgh Steelers, by Lamar Jackson throwing for 340 yards, and 4 touchdowns or 3 touchdowns. Yep. He's going to beat me over the top. And I know he can do that, but I certainly know for a fact Derrick Henry and an athletic Lamar Jackson, when he uses his legs to, will beat me. I know that's what's going to happen. So let's make him stay in the pocket. Let's make him beat us down the field. Let's, put some, zones out there for, 2 deep coverages. Give some help because it's going to be a longer pass. And let's just try to keep him fresh, keep him in the pocket, and see if we can get some of those important turnovers you have to have against the Ravens to have a chance to win this game.
Yeah, well said. Good luck, Pittsburgh, because it's going to be really hard to do that. And you mentioned Derrick Henry in that backfield, man. What a different Ravens team we could see this postseason than we saw a year ago, and they were the number 1 seed a year ago. Scary proposition. We know that the Chargers now, by virtue of their win against the Raiders, they will get the 5 spot. They'll go to Houston, where they open as a road favorite against the Texans there. We had Rich Gannon on, you and I, on Monday on VIKINGS by the Books. And boy, he spoke glowingly about Justin Herbert. He does feel like, to me, I don't know if it's the Harbaugh factor, but even as talented as we all knew he was, feels like he's taking a step with Harbaugh as the head coach. Do you see it that way too?
Yeah, I do think, getting a running game back healthy again is a big piece of this whole puzzle. Just Herbert, getting him healthy, 100% healthy again, is a big piece of this puzzle. Feels like he looks healthier. It looks like the run game looks healthier. It looks like a lot of momentum's going with them. And Harbaugh's had some success in the postseason. I think that, this is a big piece of what they hired him for. Is like, you look at his success everywhere he's ever been, it's always successful. Even when he's a player, captain comeback, like, he was successful. So, you go across the board. That's why I was never surprised that the Chargers were in this spot. I thought this was going to be a team that was going to make the postseason from the beginning of the preseason. I predicted the Chargers were going to be here. They stayed exactly where they were. Did I, think it'd be the 5 seed? I don't know, but they made it. And they got a legit shot now of beating the Houston Texans, who aren't as healthy, who don't look as good in the wide receiver room as they've been. And the Chargers are playing much better defensively. So this is going to be a really interesting matchup. I can understand why the Chargers are favorites. And there's very little of me that sits there and say, would I be surprised? I'd be more surprised, I think, if Houston won than I would be if the Chargers won.
Yep. Again, what a difference a coach makes. And again, we talk about these. It's not a retread. He was in San Francisco, of course, left by his own admission to go down to Michigan. All he did there was win a national championship, beat Ohio State every year. Now he's back year one. Those Harbaughs, man, they got something going on. It's working in Charm City. It's already working year one in LA. All right, when we come back, Mark, wide receivers get a rap as being divas. Does Tyreek Hill, does he meet that criteria? We'll hear from the Cheetah himself next here on the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN.
Dave Ross, Mark Dominik, back here on the GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. And Mark, we get it. For the teams that are not going to the second season in the postseason, they're going to be frustrated. We understand it. We all know it as fans. You know, as an exec, and certainly the coaching staffs that didn't make it are going to be a little bit perturbed. That can trickle down to the players. When you look at the Dolphins, and your best player, we believe, is the Cheetah, Tyreek Hill. Tua Tagovailoa, we can make those debates. But we know that offense probably isn't going to go without Tyreek Hill. He was asked after the game yesterday if, of course, he's going to come back and play next year for Miami because he is still under contract. He said this, Mark, and I quote, "Yeah, I'm opening the door. I'm out, brah. So it was great playing here, but at the end of the day, I've got to do what's best for my career and what's best because I'm too much of a competitor to be just out there." When you hear that as a GM, Mark, I'm out, brah. Deuces. Is the Cheetah forcing his way out of South Beach?
You mean the guy I gave 3 years, $90 million extension to? You're talking about the guy that's got $10 million guaranteed base salary next year and an $18 million roster bonus coming up this next year? And it's, the club's discretion, but it's going to be fully guaranteed. The Cheetah can walk away, but he's got $28 million, almost $30 million on the table next year he can earn from the Miami Dolphins in no state income tax Florida, in warm weather, where Cheetahs like it much better than they do cold weather. And so, look, this is the same guy. And, obviously he's an uber talented player. We all know that. But Andy Reid said no. He just said, no, it's not worth it. We can win without him, and they did. Could the Dolphins do the same thing? The Dolphins are in complete control here. He has no help. Tyreek Hill can decide. He can moan and pout, and he probably will, up to where that option bonus has to be kicked in. And then they got to make a decision what they want to do. I don't love the optics of it. I'd call the agent today and just rip on him a little bit and be like, what are you talking about? Like, I just gave this guy $90 million extension because he was so happy last year that everything was great. And now suddenly, where he doesn't catch the balls many times, he's dumping on the team when Tua couldn't play all the season. And if Tua's out there whole season, the Dolphins are in the postseason. They're playing for somewhere. They're seeded whatever, over the Denver Broncos. I think so. Could they have 11 wins? Maybe. Yeah, I think so. So, before you start to just go, woe is me, and where do you want to go? You want to go to New England and help Drake May become a great player in Boston, north of Boston? Enjoy that weather? Sure. Yeah, go get it. Do you think that the Minnesota Vikings have money for you? No. Do you think the 49ers have money for you? No. Are you going back to Kansas City? No. Do you think the Buffalo Bills? Probably not. So it's like all the teams that you think can go win a championship, I don't think that they're in your wheelhouse. I don't think that they're going to say, hey, look, I need to go get Tyreek Hill because I want to give him $30 million this year and another $30 million next year to make sure that he's happy. So we make sure we have to pay him 100 or throw him 100 balls so he's happy. And then, whether we win or not, that's what really matters. And so it's a problem he's creating. And yet I think he's speaking before he's thinking and before he's talking to people. And so this is a conversation I think I would have with the agent and need to have with Tyreek, like, slow down. Like, just calm down. I know you're frustrated, but you don't need to tell the media everything you're thinking all the time. There was really no point to this. Like, hey, look, frustrating season. Walk away. Move on. Let's handle business where business should be handled, because when you start to put things out there like that, it's hard to backtrack on them a little bit. And it only makes you look worse, I think. And that's the concern we would have. So, again, the Dolphins are in control. Do I think the Dolphins want to lose Tyreek Hill? Probably not. But I don't know how much of a distraction it's been. The problem for Tyreek Hill is don't run yourself out of the league that one day that you're not going to be making money, because one day this league is going to move on without you, Tyreek, and they're not going to remember. And, Le'Veon Bell made a huge financial decision where he's like, I'm bigger than the league, and you were not. No one's bigger than the league. And so that's the problem. And so sometimes when you feel like you are, go talk to a player that played 10 years ago. Man, it went fast. I'm already out of the league. Like, it's crazy, right? And at one point, our guy Rich Gannon was MVP, and he's making $5 million a year. And people are like, that's crazy. How could Rich Gannon be making all this money? It's 55 to 60 now. You don't think he's like looking back on these guys are crazy? So, you have a chance to earn so much money in Miami, in a place where a lot of players like to call the off season. You get to call it the whole season. I just think that he spoke too soon.
Yeah, he's probably have a conversation with Le'Veon Bell and maybe Antonio Brown, too. Two guys that maybe those careers ended prematurely. Really talented players that look like they were headed for the Hall of Fame. Tyreek Hill could be on that same trajectory of Hall of Fame, but you start running yourself out of numerous places. And, oh, by the way, you made the great point about Andy Reid. All they did when they got rid of the Cheetah was win back-to-back Super Bowls without him. You are replaceable. So this ego stuff, it's great. Diva receivers, we get all that stuff. And you saw what Kansas City did without you. And they figured out not only ways to win, but win the ultimate prize twice in a row without your services. Woo, great take there, Mark. Love that. Let's get to the draft, because I look at this and I see the Titans now sitting with the number 1 pick. And you made the point here. We look at the draft class last year with the quarterbacks. 6 of the first 12 were quarterbacks. It's just not going to be the same market this year. We just don't have, at least projected, the talent level at quarterback this year. It's not that long ago, you go back 3 years, where Kenny Pickett was the only quarterback taken in the first round. He was taken 20th overall that year by the Steelers. He's not even on the Steelers anymore, right? He's not backing up in Philadelphia. So sometimes they bear out that, look, it's just not there. A lot of these teams in the top 10 need quarterbacks on paper. They're not there. Mark, as a GM, what do you do? If you're Brian Callahan, if you're Rand Carthon, does Rand Carthon even get to make that decision? Because you can't mess up this pick, or at least this position and the equity you have with this pick.
Yeah, you have a problem. It's not the 2024 class. 6 quarterbacks, top 12. I think that we'll see more than 2 I think we'll still see like 4 quarterbacks go in the first round of this draft class. I think a lot of people are looking at Quinn Ewers and they've got him too low in the second round. I think he finds his way into the first. Because you got to also remember, there's clubs that are making the postseason that we don't know what's going to happen with their quarterback, meaning a la the LA Rams. Like, what does Stafford decide to do after this year? Does he want to continue to play? or not. And if he doesn't, the Rams sitting there picking 20-something-ish or 30-something-ish, do they sit there and go, hey, there's a chance to grab a quarterback? Do the Seattle Seahawks picking 18th now in the worst draft slot you can have, technically? You are the furthest away from first pick, and you're the first one out of the postseason. So congratulations, you're picking 18th. It's like, ugh. But it was a good sound effect. But, Seattle could absolutely take a quarterback at 18. There's no debate about it in my mind. Like, that's a real possibility, let alone the 6 clubs that are basically in the top 10 that all could take quarterbacks. So you've got to evaluate this class, and you've got to stay consistent with it. You've got to start looking at them right away to make sure you don't ebb and flow with, like, the heart of, like, the media and, like, oh, we love Cam Ward. And, last year, if you come out, he was a 4th. And this year, he's the first pick in the draft. Like, wait, what just happened? I know he went to Miami. He had a good season. But did all that change? Did that much change? It's a possibility. But we got to make sure we check some balance this thing. In addition, you got to look at the veterans that you have, the capabilities. And does a Kirk Cousins end up at a Giant? Does a Kirk Cousins end up, as a Raider? Is it kind of that kind of situation? Does Aaron Rodgers decide to play and Stafford retires? And now is Aaron Rodgers a Ram for 2 more seasons? I think that's a possibility, right? So I think you got to look at the veteran situation, and you got to look at, obviously, the draft. The problem is this carousel this year, unlike last year, there's not enough seats at the table. There's too many opens at quarterback, I think, where there's not going to be enough players that are going to be able to fill them. So does this open the door for, there's going to be this Mac Jones versus somebody else, because Mac Jones or a player in that capacity? Yeah. Does Jimmy Garoppolo find another spot, one more chance? I don't think so, but maybe Marcus Mariota won yesterday, right? So it's like, does he pop up somehow somewhere? So again, I just think there's too many openings this year and not enough solutions. And I think that's going to make it very interesting to watch this whole play out.
It's interesting because out of the top 9 right now for the 2025 draft, it feels like out of the top 9, only 3 have quarterbacks that we believe are at least cemented as starters for next year, right? And that changed, too, down the stretch with Bryce Young. With the Panthers drafting at 8, we feel like it's going to be Bryce going into year 3 with Dave Canales year 2. It feels like Trevor Lawrence, you're still going to kick the tires on Trevor and hope you get something to Jacksonville at number 5, and certainly Drake May at number 4 with the Patriots. Everybody else, so Mark, Titans, Browns, Giants, Raiders, Jets, Saints. The rest of those teams are looking at quarterback. If you were the GM, and every spot's going to be different for those conversations, but if you were one of those others that had a quarterback out of those 3 of the 9, would you be looking to move out of that spot, knowing that it's valuable to somebody to possibly trade up to get a quarterback if that's where they're looking, and it wouldn't necessarily affect what you might be doing with those picks?
Well, I think what you've got to do is you've got to really make sure that when you're in the top 10, you got to be very careful you're not drafting for need and you're drafting for overall talent. And need falls into a trap every time, and you get trapped into needs all the time. I can speak from experience where I drafted a position that I needed worse than I probably was what the talent was on the board. But I should have taken maybe another position where I think I'm good there, and didn't, and so then that player doesn't pan out, and suddenly you're like, oh, I could have had that guy instead. And so you fall into that trap in top 10. You've got to make sure you hit these top 10, that they got to be players that signed a second contracts, have to be guys that go second contract, or you completely busted on them. It's just a fact. Like, you can't dust on a top 10 pick. So in this year, the guys that are dynamic like that aren't quite. This is a good draft class, but it's not last year's. It's not Malik Neighbors. It's not Marvin Harrison. It's not Brock Bowers, right? This class doesn't have some of that, as well as the quarterback. So this class is a little different. So you've got to really be honest about what can we do in 2025 to address the quarterback spot, but not to force a quarterback spot. And then I think that's where these veterans that you see, the Kirk Cousins, I don't think there's an issue. He's going to be starting somewhere, not from Atlanta next year, but somebody's going to get Kirk Cousins. And if you're an organization, you're like, oh, gosh, we end up with Kirk Cousins, maybe it won't be as bad as you think. It just let it play out a little bit and be patient, but understand there are a lot of problems out there. And I don't know if there's enough solutions at quarterback this year to solve all of them.
Very quickly, so you're looking at maybe a Sam Darnold if maybe the decision gets easier to move to J.J. McCarthy. You mentioned Kirk Cousins. A lot of those teams that can't get in the draft in the top 9 that I mentioned probably go that free agency route or trade route.
I think they have to. I don't think they have much of a choice. I think you've got to kind of get into that route. And so I think that's where Kirk Cousins still has value in this league, because not everybody can get one. So if the Raiders want to do something at 9, they're not going to, I don't think, have the collateral to move all the way up to get a quarterback, probably. So if they don't like, you want to put somebody with Aiden O'Connell, maybe it is a Kirk Cousins who, let them battle it out a little bit, knowing that Kirk Cousins should have the nod.
Maybe even an Aaron Rodgers. Just throwing it out there. Mark, really appreciate the conversations as always, my friend. Great stuff here on the GM Shuffle. Everybody, thanks for listening and watching. We'll see you next time here at GM Shuffle, presented by DraftKings and VIKINGS.